Fantastic. So it's now 12:03, so we're probably going to get started. I think everybody's attending that will be attending anyway. So just to give you a bit of a heads up, my name is Laura Hodgkiss. I am the event and training team leader here at the Chamber. And today's webinar is preparing your business for Brexit, hosted by Maggie Neal and Wendy Hall. Just a couple of quick points just for you to aware. For those of you that have never used the Zoom platform before, it is really, really easy. So we cannot see and we cannot hear you today. So the only way that you can communicate with us is via the chat function at the bottom of your screen or at the top of your screen, depending on where your bar sits on your laptop or PC. And the Q&A function as well, which is going to be useful when we finish the webinar today, as we're going to be asking people any questions that they've got for Wendy and Maggie today. Just to confirm, those that have never used Zoom before, if you want to just open the chat screen at the bottom and just give me a quick hi in the chat function, just so I can see that you guys are with me and that you can hear me okay. Wonderful, lots of highs, fantastic, brilliant, great. Wow, lots. Everybody's saying hello to me, which is fantastic, which means everybody can hear me and everybody can see me. Fantastic, brilliant. Great, fantastic. Well, with all that in mind, I'm going to be introducing Wendy Hall and Maggie Neal today, part of the Staffordshire Chamber of Commerce, and they are international trade advisors. So it's over to you, Maggie.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining Wendy and myself. I just want to remind you at this point that this is very much a whistle-stop tour of some of the issues which may impact your business, and also to remind you that if you want us to elaborate on anything highlighted, we're happy to do this outside of the webinar too. Unfortunately, we're a little bit short on time today. So, without further ado, our Brexit direction. For those companies dealing with the EU, there will be changes to the way you do business. They might be slight. They might even be for the better, but nevertheless, companies should be factoring some of these thoughts into their business model. For instance, your supply chain. If you buy from or sell to the EU, will there be an impact in terms of time and cost? If you rely on EU raw materials, will you still be able to source in the same way? Will there be delays which may affect your production times? Your EU buyers will also be looking at these things. Will different standards apply? Will export or import licenses be required, which may add delays, and we'll touch on this a little bit later. Do you know your tariff numbers? Will duties be applied that weren't previously applicable? And what about exchange rates? Will they change? And what about VAT? What extra administration could be required? Customs declarations may come into force and add costs or even delays. Now, have you got an agency agreement in place? Are you an agent for an EU company? Or do you have EU agents yourselves? Agency law is currently EU agency law, so this might change. And will you be able to manage your agents in the same way? These are just things that we're asking you to think about today, nothing negative. We hopefully just want to clarify things a little bit for you. So let's go on to the next slide.
Thanks, Laura. So yeah, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk a little bit about the responsibilities you have as a business and that you need to be aware of. So making sure you're aware of customs procedures, documentation, and providing the right information to your freight forwarder or customs broker. If you've only traded in the EU up till now, you won't have had to do this, so it'll be completely new to you. We'll talk a little bit about trade agreements, what we currently have, and how it will change. What are they, and what are the benefits? Associated documentation, which some of it may change too. We'll have a little talk about that post-transition. So some things will change, but this is why it's important to be prepared. Customs declarations. If you've only traded with the EU, you will not have to have done this. So your freight forwarder or customs broker will need to be aware of, need to get information from you in order to make sure that you're customs compliant. So from the 1st of January 2021, customs declarations will have to be made for trade in the EU, as it already is with the rest of the world. So you'll be just following suit now with what you have to do for the rest of the world trade. So you'll have to make sure you provide the necessary information to your shipper so they can provide the correct information to customs. So we'll go through this briefly, the type of data that you need to provide. Can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
Okay, thanks, Laura. Yeah, let's have a look at these Brexit timelines. We officially signed to leave the EU at the end of January this year. So we have actually got Brexit done. We're now in the transition period, which will end on the 31st of December this year, and this is enshrined in law. However, we do have until the 31st of July to extend the period, which in these unprecedented times could potentially happen. However, we've been assured by government that it's not going to happen, and we are on track. And the good news is the UK-EU negotiations started again this week and are ongoing. So hopefully we're back on track and we'll keep moving to schedule. Thanks very much. Can I have the next slide, please, Laura?
So key facts about international trade, as it states here in the slide, all goods imported from or exported to countries outside the EU must be declared to customs. These are called third countries, and the UK will be a third country from the 1st of January 2021. Some goods are controlled and need licenses. At the moment, the EU doesn't require licenses when trading with one another, but post-transition, we will. We've been advised by the Export Control Organisation, which is part of the Department for International Trade, that this will be the case. This means a delay for you whilst applying for the appropriate licence if you need one. So you need to take this into consideration. UK regulations are based on EU directives. Currently, as you know, post-transition, the UK will no longer have to assume EU directive rules and will have complete control. And going back to customs declarations, customs declarations have a value. You must tell HMRC the value of your goods. Declarations and tariffs apply to all goods being shipped, whether they are being sold or not. The statistical value for exported goods is the cost of the goods to the buyer, or if no sale, the price which the goods would have fetched if sold. This includes packing costs, inland transport costs in the UK, dock and loading costs, and all other charges, profits, insurance, commissions, royalties. And this is to the point where the goods are loaded onto the vessel. So if a good's re-exported after process or repair in the UK, the value declared must include the charge for their service and value of the goods when imported. So you need to think about that as well. Right, can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
Okay, moving on to trade agreements. Currently, the EU, which includes us at the moment, has trade agreements with around 70 countries around the world. This means the EU and those participating countries can trade with little or no import duties or restrictions on goods, providing that their goods qualify, of course. Again, we deliver training courses at the Chamber of Commerce, which can go into this in a lot more detail, and it might be an important point for you to consider post-transition. It can also really focus a business on where good trading partners exist. So to simplify the trade agreement situation, it was set up to make sure that partner countries could trade with each other to mutual benefit. In other words, to encourage trade within the club, so to speak. We may lose some of these partners, but we've got more coming online. And currently, regimes we use alongside these agreements are the paper documentation, which is the EUR1s and ATR documents. These are paper declarations that the goods qualify to be classed as preferential goods. And then we have the REX, the Registered Exporter System, and Approved Exporter Status. And these are electronic systems. Some countries around the world don't want the paper systems, they want electronic systems. So you can apply for these online and you get a number which will also qualify you to trade preferentially with these particular countries. Now the next slide, please, Laura.
So far, so the UK, since Brexit was announced, the UK has agreed continuity deals with the following countries, and you can see them all listed there. So negotiations are continuing as well as we go forward. And I think if we can have the next slide, please, Laura.
And these are the recent developments. Singapore has now signed. Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay and Uruguay are still waiting ratification. Similarly, Vietnam and Australia and New Zealand we're in discussions with. So it's all very positive because these are quite large trading nations. So it will be of benefit to the UK if we get these developments in place and these agreements signed. Can I have the next slide, please, Laura?
So this is just a quick stats fact sheet, if you like. And I know it's 2018, but we just thought this was worth looking at. The top 10 trading partners that the UK has. Out of those 10 countries, 7 of them are from the EU. There's only 3 there that are outside of the EU. So it's just it's important to note that the EU is a big trading partner with us both on export and import. But obviously we're going to be, you know, widening our net, aren't we? And hopefully trying to export to other markets outside of the EU. So we're going to think positive about it. Can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
Okay, documentary requirements. So there's still a requirement for things like commercial invoices, and this is an absolute requirement for chambers of commerce. We can't accept pro forma invoices. It has to be a full commercial invoice, so that will still be required. Packing lists will be required. Hazardous declarations. This is obviously a very important factor. That's not going to change. We will always need to declare goods for transport purposes, making sure that everybody is safe and looked after. And the transport documentation, bills of lading, airway bills, CMR notes, we can't see that changing. Also certificates of origin for those goods that are traded with Arab countries or the Arab League states. An Arab British certificate of origin is required for those. And currently we use an EU certificate of origin for the rest of the world. Now this is going to be replaced by a UK certificate of origin, and be assured that the Chamber of Commerce has box loads of these, and we're fully in line and fully up to speed with this when the things do change, maybe at the end of this year. So preference documents we spoke about before, in line with the trade agreements. ATR is a document that's used for Turkey. Now that potentially could be discontinued, but it will depend on what kind of trade deal we strike and if that continues. And the EUR1 may still be required for some continuity countries. We don't know at this stage. We may go electronic, we may have additional documentation, but all these things are up in the air at the moment. We believe that they will still be required, but obviously we will keep you posted at all times when things change. Just as an aside, there are some documentary requirements which have been removed due to the COVID-19 problem. So fewer documentary constraints on PPE and stuff like that that's coming into the country. We're very, very hopeful that we won't be needing this after we leave the EU on the 31st of December, but it's there just in case. So next slide, please, Laura.
So yes, something else to consider post-transition, additional documentation that you may need for trade within the EU. You'd normally have to do it anyway for rest of the world trade, but you will certainly also need to consider it for EU. So things like import and export licenses, that's one of the things that you will need to check to make sure that you are importing or exporting with the appropriate documentation or license. We'll have a little bit of a chat about that later, about how you find that out, how you find out whether your goods need a license or not. More documentation as customs declarations, which we've already alluded to. Customs declarations won't necessarily be done by you. Some companies do their own, but most of the time your freight forwarder or customs broker would do customs declarations for you. If you're trading already with the rest of the world, it's already been done. But again, as I mentioned, for EU trade, this is something that wasn't done before, but will now. And there will be a cost attached to this. You will be charged for this extra service. So, I mean, not massive amounts, I suppose it depends on the volumes that you trade. So that's something else. Animal origin and plant health checks, again, it depends on the type of industry sector you're in, but with some products where before you didn't have to have a necessary checks done for EU trade, you will do, and you would have to go through the relevant government organisation to get those specific certificates. So it could be you have to go to DEFRA, for instance, the Department for Food, Environment and Rural Affairs. So you will have to go to, you know, the specific government organisation to get these certificates. So again, something else. These are all measures that you need to look at and checks as a business. They're part of your responsibility. And your buyer may request certain documents as well, specific ones relevant to their country needs. Helpful links below on this website. There's a new government website now that's just been launched, and yes, on that one you can check duties, customs, exporting goods service. If you click on that link, you will be able to access the slides afterwards. We'll make sure you get them, but you can click on that and it will tell you how to check what duties are incurred for a particular product, whether you're importing or exporting, and it will also tell you the documentation you need for that particular country. Please bear in mind this is being updated. There's still stuff on there that we haven't fully got information on, where, for example, trade agreements where we're just, these are just being discussed, so this will be updated as we go along. A couple of other sources of reference there is Kroner's and Tate's. They're sort of reference guides that you do have to subscribe to. The new government website is free. The bottom two you'll have to pay for and subscribe to, but you can also ring the Chamber of Commerce for advice as well. We will be there to help. Laura, can we have the next slide, please?
Okay, let's have a look at controlled goods. Now, all the nasty stuff, the guns, the weapons of mass destruction, some chemical products, torture, you know, all the obvious stuff are subject to licensing laws wherever they go. However, at the moment, dual-use goods are accepted in EU trade and are not subject to license. So what are dual-use goods? They could be chemicals, software computers, blueprints for technology, even certain emails. It's really anything that can be used in normal trade or can be transferred to a military use. So that's what dual-use items are. Now, we've been reliably informed that even goods traded with the EU may be subject to import and export licenses for dual-use products. So once again, these things were subject to EU-UK negotiations. So we're not going to go into that in too much detail, but there is a website there which is a very useful website. It's the Beginner's Guide to Export Controls, and it's quite comprehensive and it's being updated all the time. And there are people there who you can actually send an email to or speak to that will give you some real solid advice on whether your goods will need an export license or an import license going forward. And the next slide, please, Laura.
So we thought it would be a good idea to give you a little example of what it will look like as we come out of the EU. And yes, it's just really to make you aware of the. I think we just need to go back to just previous slide, please, Laura, if that's okay. Laura, could we just have the previous slide, please? That one, that's it, thank you. The next one, please, Laura. That's it, thank you. That one, yeah, we got there, thank you. So yes, we thought it would be a good idea to give you an idea of a case study, what it will look like when we do come out of the EU. Again, it's not being negative, but it's just really to highlight the issues that you may have to be aware of. So this one is a particular company, it's an IT company, and they supply liquid crystal display colour video monitors. So it's like a computer screen basically. The tariff number is there, which is 8528, and they want to export Italy, and we talked about declarations. So that isn't required at the moment, and goods can move freely. So no barriers to trade. Laura, can we have the next slide, please? So, can we go back one, Laura, please? Thank you. That one, yeah, thank you. So post transition, this is what it will look like. If you wanted to export that particular product into Spain, it will mean that we are now, as a third country, the UK, there would be export customs entries required, and there are cost implications to that. An export license is required for this particular product. Is classed as dual use. Maggie's just explained to you what dual use is. So you would have to apply for a license, and of course there are time implications for this. So you have to make an application to the Export Control Organisation and Spire. That's where you do the online application, and this can take time. So you've got to bear that in mind, of the time implications, as well as the cost for customs entries. Which isn't massive, but again, it depends on volumes. Applying for an export license doesn't cost anything, but the time does. Time is cost as well, isn't it, if you think about it? So on top of that, duty importing that product into the EU from a third country, which it's going to cost 14%, whereas before it was 0. So it's just something to think about. Obviously, it's making you less competitive exporting that product into Spain if it's going to be 14% import duty. So that's something else that you'll have to think about, is negotiating the cost of that. Are you going to share cost, or negotiate some sort of agreement with them? So it's just really to make you aware of the additional costs and barriers, and obviously paperwork. Can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
Incoterms. Okay, what are Incoterms? I'm assuming that a lot of you will already be quite familiar with Incoterms, but for those who aren't, they are internationally and legally recognised trade terms for business contracts. So they provide rules and guidance about how a particular consignment is being transacted. They're very, very important, and companies should be aware of Incoterms and the implications there. They define 3 very, very specific things. So they define where delivery takes place, so the obligations to the buyer and the seller. In other words, where the seller has agreed to deliver the goods to, if that's the case, or where the buyer has agreed to take delivery of the goods. So it's clearly defined there. It also defines where risk passes from seller to buyer. This is very, very important, because if anything happens to the goods in transit, you need a legal definition of who is going to be responsible for replacing the goods, repairing the goods, any damage that's happened to the goods along the route, and also who pays for what. So this is who's paying for the freight aspect of it, who's paying for any transportation costs, any paperwork costs, any customs entry costs, port dues, duty rates when it gets to the other side. So it clearly defines all of those 3 areas, which are really, really important. We do stress that companies should be adding this information to all their commercial paperwork, because if there is a dispute, it's there, it's defined, and it's clear, and it is legally upheld. Now, Incoterms generally get reviewed about every 10 years. The latest edition came into force January this year. There are 11 rules, so very few companies will use all 11, but it is quite important to know what your obligations are under Incoterms. It says there, Staffordshire Chambers of Commerce do Incoterms training courses. We're happy to go through those things with you. So Please contact us if you have any queries, but as I say, it is quite an important aspect of an international contract. Thanks, Laura. Can I have the next slide, please?
So this really is, just go back one, please, Laura. Yeah, a third country, thank you, is what we will be. The UK will be a third country. So it's basically all countries and territories which are not in the EU. So we will be a third country post-Brexit. With regard to exports to third countries are zero rated. So when you are invoicing any country outside of the EU, you would zero rate your invoice. VAT is only applicable in the EU currently. So on your invoice, if you're invoicing a company in Germany and they are VAT registered, you basically put their VAT number on your invoice, and that means the VAT is picked up in their country. So it is only an EU requirement, but as we come out of the EU, then you will zero rate to your customer. You don't have to put their VAT number on in Germany in future. You would just zero rate as you would with the rest of the world. But in order to zero rate your invoice, this is part of compliance, you must obtain proof of export. It is required by HMRC regardless. You should be doing that anyway for your EU trade as well. So it's very important that you get proof of export, because if you're zero rating your invoice, you have to prove that the goods have left the UK shores. So can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
And this is kind of following on from what Wendy's just been saying. It is a really important issue because, as you say, there's no VAT added to invoices for goods that are leaving the UK. So companies should always be getting proof of export, whether the goods are going outside of the EU or not. If not, HMRC will assume that it's a UK sale, and as VAT is applicable to UK sales, they will want the VAT element of that. You need to get this within 90 days of the sale or dispatch, whichever is the earlier. Otherwise, as a company, you could be liable for VAT. And it's worth noting that proof that goods have been collected is not proof of export. All it means is that the goods have left your factory and not the UK shores. And that's the key element that HMRC will be looking for. And can I have the next slide, please, Laura?
So the importance of tariffs. So yes, very important. Tariffs are a tax placed by a country's government on imported goods. They are imposed to protect a country's domestic market from cheap imports. They're sometimes called a harmonised system, or HS code, or commodity code. And it's a standardised system of names and numbers to classify goods. This code, it's about 10 digits on import or 8 digits on export, determines the rate of duty applicable to goods when imported into that country. It also provides statistics so we can review the balance of trade figures. So the tariff also tells you whether there are any quotas or other specific measures you as a business need to know. Before you import or export those goods, it's a business responsibility to check. Of course, at the moment, we don't have to worry about import duties trading in the EU, but post-transition, a business will need to be prepared for this. You'll need to find out if your goods, when imported or exported, will incur duties and or have any specific measures you need to comply to. Can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
Now, the UK government has been in consultation about tariffs. They're trying to make it easier for UK companies to trade internationally. The consultation period is now ended, but that's the basis of it there. There is a website there that you can have a look at. It will only tell you that the consultation period is over, but we should be having some notification on any changes to the tariff very shortly. And the next slide, please, Laura.
So, yes, the World Trade Organization, you've probably heard this, the WTO being referred to many times since Brexit was announced. So just a bit of background, it's the WTO is the global body governing international trade. Member countries that don't have a free trade agreement with each other trade under WTO rules. So if the UK does not reach an agreement with the EU on a future trading relationship after Brexit, then the default position is that WTO rules will apply on trade between the UK and the EU and the UK and third countries, including countries which the EU has trade deals with. So this means that exports to the EU would be subject to the same customs checks, tariff and regularity barriers that the UK and EU currently charge on trade with countries such as the USA or China. Can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
Okay, so we can see that tariffs have a huge impact on goods that are traded internationally. Here's a little bit of an example. Once again, this is possibly worst case scenario, but it give you an idea of the impact on a particular company. And this is a genuine company that we deal with in Staffordshire. It's a clothing company that designs sports apparel in the UK, but outsources manufacture to Turkey. And that's quite a common thing. You know, Turkey is well known for its textile manufacturing. The company then supplies their largest customer in France. So currently, because we are within the EU and we have trade agreements with Turkey, goods are imported from Turkey after they've been manufactured under the EU-Turkey trade agreement. So that's fine, they're duty-free under that agreement. Very little paperwork is required. And currently, the goods are exported to France, also with minimal paperwork and no duties at all. I'm going to have the next slide, please, Laura. Now we can see, depending on what happens with the trade negotiations, potentially the clothing imported from Turkey could attract a 12.4% import duty rate because we wouldn't have a trade agreement with Turkey anymore, potentially. Import customs entries would be required, and that's a little cost there involved, and also potentially a little bit of a delay if you've got a short lead time on goods, and there will be paperwork requirements. And then when the goods are then exported to their largest customer in France, they may also attract a 12.4% rate of duty. So the French customer would have to pay that, or the UK company would have to absorb that. Export customs entry would also be required again to get it into France, and there will be paperwork requirements. So you can see that tariffs, and this is why these tariff negotiations have been so important. You can see that if we do revert to these tariffs, that particular company, their base cost would go up by approximately 25%, which they may have to pass on to the customer or absorb. So this is why we're having a look at these tariffs in a little bit more detail. So the next slide, please, Laura.
So you'll also probably have seen this as well 12 months ago, that if you're only trading in the EU, you will need to get a URI number. So what does it mean? What is it? So it stands for the Economic Operator Registration and Identification Number. Basically, it's based on your VAT number. It's your ID. It's really telling customs who you are. So that number always has to be entered into the customs entry when it leaves if any goods of yours leave the UK, or equally on the import as well, it would be your supplier's URI number. So it's used in the process of customs entry declarations and customs clearance for both imports and exports, for shipments travelling to and from the EU and the rest of the world. So it's used for statistical purposes, it allows customs authorities to exchange information, and it's for security purposes. So as I've mentioned, if you've only traded in the EU, you won't have one, but you'll have to apply for one, and you would do that through HMRC. It takes about a couple of 3 days. It's very easy, but I would probably, if you're already VAT registered, if you hadn't already enrolled, you will have been auto-enrolled anyway by HMRC if you're VAT registered. If you're not VAT registered, you still have to apply, and there is a process for that too. So you cannot trade internationally without a URI number. So if you're planning on doing that, you need to get one arranged as soon as possible, which is quite painless, and it is an EU requirement as well as a UK requirement. So you'll have to do it if you want to trade. So can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
And here's another measure that was put in place by the government, transitional simplified procedure. It's a measure which it was aiming to ease the administrative pressures on importers. It reduces the amount of information required by HMRC to clear goods when they arrive in the UK, along with the initial financial burden. Goods that come into the UK from a third country require import duty and VAT to be paid immediately. This was going to remove the need to do this immediately and the financial burden. It's now been suspended. However, it may very well be resurrected, but there's nothing in place at the moment. It was withdrawn after the 31st of January when we signed the agreement to leave. But those companies who have already applied for the TSP, Transitional Simplified Procedures, should keep your paperwork in place, because, as I say, it may very well be resurrected and we may need to revert to that at some point in the future. Next slide, please, Laura.
Okay, quickly, I'm realising we're getting quite, we're running a little bit over, so apologies for that, but we've only got 2 or 3 more slides left, so please bear with us, thank you. Just a little few words about duty deferment. So a deferment account, a deferment approval number, a DAN is abbreviated to. So a duty deferment account number allows importers to defer payment of their customs duty and import VAT liabilities until the 15th of the month following a physical import. So what does it mean? Well, it enables goods to be cleared and delivered without being delayed pending payment. You have to set a DAN with HMRC subject to an agreed maximum limit, which is usually sufficient to cover a full month's customs duty and VAT. And you will need a customs comprehensive guarantee as well. You will have to apply for that if you have a DAN, a deferment account number. So it stands for a Customs Comprehensive Guarantee, a CCG, and you'll need that to cover multiple customs debts. You'll need to be authorised by HMRC and your bank needs to act as guarantor. If you apply for a DAN, you'll need a CCG to back it up, as I've just said. So it's like an insurance against non-payment of import duties and VAT. So it really means that HMRC isn't left with the debt if you don't pay it. That's why you need this insurance on top. Can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
Okay, we spoke briefly about VAT and duties and VAT being required when goods arrive into the UK. This is just how it's calculated. It's a very simple calculation. It's the customs value, which is the value of your goods, plus any add-ons, as we spoke about earlier, the amount of duty that's payable, and that's based on the tariff number, plus any additional costs landed to the point of delivery, and then VAT is calculated on top of that. If you reclaim import VAT on your normal VAT return, you can carry on to doing that as long as you've received a form C79, which is a VAT certificate from customs. And the next slide, please.
So VAT post-transition, HMRC introduced last year actually postponed accounting on VAT for goods over £135. They did withdraw it, but they've brought it back in actually. The VAT suspension was withdrawn, but it's now being included, and it was announced at the latest budget announcement last month. So so that's really very useful to know actually. Basically, postponed accounting will be introduced for imports from the EU and including the rest of the world imports too. So it's basically a VAT deferral scheme. So no cash VAT payments have to be made on arrival into the UK. It's only available to VAT registered businesses though. So you'll have to provide your VAT number to whoever is doing your customs declarations, which would be your freight forwarder. This will be customs entered and will show on your online monthly statement that VAT has been postponed. So this is your evidence to declare or to recover import VAT on your VAT return. So that's quite useful to know. Can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
Okay, customs declaration, as Wendy has spoken about in some detail, Now, it's our understanding that customs declarations will be required when we fully leave the EU. There's nothing required until the end of the year. However, after that, UK as a third country would be required to complete import and export declarations for goods leaving or coming in from anywhere in the world, including the EU. Companies will be required to provide certain information to get the goods in and out of the UK. Things that you may not have considered before, like whether the goods are coming in or going out temporarily or for permanent import or export. This is when a CPC code is required. And again, we can talk about this more fully and explain it to you outside of this webinar. You need to understand if you're compliant, because you may be the responsible party for giving this information. If you then, if you are, you may attract penalties if you give the wrong information. But don't worry about that. The Chamber of Commerce is authorised to submit customs declarations on your behalf. We have trained staff available, so please have a word with us. The staff have been trained to a high level, so we will be able to help you out with all that kind of information. And the next slide, please.
So just going back to common requirements for all declarations. So when you do start having to provide this information to your freight forwarder for EU trade, if you're not used to this, you need to provide details of, well, who's the importer and the exporter, the customs procedure code. As I say, Maggie said, we won't be talking about that right now, but if you wanted to know what that was, then we can advise. The tariff number, the goods value, and all of those things, their origin, country where it's going to, if there's preferential trade with that particular country, and also controlled information, import or export licenses. You would need to let the customs broker know if there are any special licenses they need to know about before they leave the country or they come into the country. Okay, thanks. Can we have the next slide, please, Laura?
So, why is it important to get it right? Well, it could cost you in terms of finances or delays at the port or border or airport. It could influence duty relief or VAT systems. Also, potentially, in the worst case scenario, if the wrong information is given, your goods could potentially be seized by Border Force. It could also impact on things like approved exporter, AEO status, approved economic operator status, which companies can apply to be accredited. It could also disrupt the business. Penalties and fiscal criminal penalties could be imposed. So all the things that would happen in the worst case scenario, and it could lead to obviously detrimental to your business. And the next slide, please.
So just finally, just to say that we do run these courses at the Chamber of Commerce. Hopefully we'll be kicking in again in September if the COVID-19 crisis is lifted and we can get back to normal. Obviously we'll let you know if anything changes to this. So if you did want any more detailed training, then we do offer it at the Chamber. So I think, thank you. I think we've now finished. Is there anything else we want to add? Any questions?
Hi everyone, thank you for listening today. So I'm just going to give you the opportunity now to ask any questions in the Q&A box I mentioned at the beginning of the screen. I noticed that some of you sent me some chat messages halfway through that as well. So let me just get through those as well, and I'll be able to ask Maggie and Wendy those questions for you. So just bear with me 1 second. If you just want to type your questions at the bottom of the screen, that would be fantastic. Dominic, I just got your response there just about the connection not being great at certain points during the webinar. Do you want to just pop any questions that you weren't able, or if there was anything that you missed in the Q&A section, just so we can pick that up for you? So ladies, I'm just going to go through the questions now for you to answer. So just bear with me 1 second. So I've just got a question here, Wendy and Maggie. Will I still need to use a customs entries if I am AEO status?
I'll answer this one.
Yep.
Yes, you will need to still have customs entries done if you're AEO status. Yes, you will. I mean, this is a privileged status. You have to apply for this with HMRC, but you would still have to have your customs entries done. But it means that you'll probably have less customs checks. So you probably go through a little bit quicker, but you still have to have customs entries if you're AEO. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. And where can I get my export documents from?
Where can you get your export documents from? I'll take that one. It depends on what export documents you're looking for, but if they are things like certificates of origin or EUR1s or ATR documents, even blank forms, chambers of commerce hold the supplies of these, and they can process documents very, very quickly. So that would be my first port of call. Go to the local chamber of commerce and we'll help you out with that one.
Brilliant, fantastic. So we've got another 2 questions. So Stephanie writes, in 2019, forwarders told us we would need our EU customers EORI number in order to be able to ship goods to them. Forwarders have offered us to do the customs declarations for us and sort out duty. Will the customers EORI this be needed? Will the EORI be needed?
I can answer that one. Yes, EORI numbers are needed for all trade. So the customer's EORI number will be, you'll certainly need to know that.
Okay. Fantastic, Maggie. Thank you very much. Michaela writes, you talked about goods. What about services?
Yes, I know, Michaela. It is mainly about the movement of physical goods. But we should have highlighted that right at the beginning of the presentation, so apologies for that. We do talk more about the movement of physical goods, but if you do want some specific advice about services then and how it will affect you post transition, then please contact us directly and we'll be happy to help. We can advise and get you the appropriate information. So yes, we will certainly help you. We can arrange a conference call or whatever. So we'll do that.
Fantastic. And Dave asks, how is the value to be determined where it is high labour value at the point of delivery? And then he's put in brackets installation.
Well, costs of tooling are included in the valuation build-up. So any tools that are required that you need to have produced, that's included in the valuation build-up. But it depends if the installation is classed as a service or not. So I think what Dave's saying is that part of the value of his consignment is made up of the service element. Is that what he's saying, I think?
Well, Dave will probably just...
I tell you what, I'll have a word with Dave after the webinar, if you like, rather than hold people up while we go backwards and forwards with that question. So if you can collect his information, Laura, I'll give him a quick call afterwards.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Great. And Dominic, you've just said that will the slides be available today? Yes, they will be available for you, and there'll also be a copy of everything that Maggie and Wendy have said today on our webinar library, which you can find on the Staffordshire Chamber website as well. So you will be able to access both the slides and the recording that we've done today as well. Let's just check the chat. Jeff, I've just noticed you put a question in the chat box. Currently, freight forwarders manage all of our customs entries. Is it worthwhile us looking into managing our own custom entries?
I'll answer that one, Maggie, if it's okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, most freight forwarders do your customs entries. Whether you want to, you'd have to have the software to talk to the customs software, and it can be quite expensive. You're talking thousands of pounds. So unless you've got a lot of money, a spare cash available to do that and get somebody trained up, it's quite a detailed job actually to do customs entries, both for import and export. So I would just say it may be worthwhile you considering just working with your freight forwarder. They're fully trained and they have the software to talk to customs. But obviously there are other customs brokers, but if your freight forwarder is doing a good job for you, then of course still use them. They offer that as a service, but we also offer customs declarations as well. It's a service that the British Chambers of Commerce are offering, so there's no harm in getting quotes from other service providers, but normally your freight forwarder, if they're doing it for you now, you're probably best off leaving it as that. You probably wouldn't want to pay for the software, so it's quite expensive. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wendy. Just having a quick look. I think we finished all the questions, so I'll just pop your contact details at the back. So there you can just see on the screen, I've just popped Wendy's and Maggie's details just in reference to the chamber. Wendy and Maggie, is there anything else that you want to say before we go today?
No, I don't think so, but if any of the companies have attended and they would like to have a chat with us, it's not just myself and Maggie, we have a team of advisors based in at the Chamber of Commerce. There's 6 of us, so very experienced staff who can give you advice and support, so please contact us.
Absolutely. I'll just echo what Wendy said, and thank you all very much for your patience and apologies for running over a little bit.
Not a problem at all, ladies. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And like I said, you can get copies of both this and the slides on our website. But don't hesitate to contact either of the ladies separately with the details that we've just provided for you here. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.